just always liked acting, and I like being a big, strong guy that hurts people.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Basic AF. I am Tom Anderson, your co-host. It's a fresh new episode, and I am joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Jeff Battersby. Hello, Jeff.
Tom Anderson, how are you? I'm great.
I'm doing well. We're
how are your Buffalo Bills
Lunar
now
New
that you're
Year
part of
here.
Bills
Bills,
Nation?
We're not doing sports today, buddy. So, no sports, no.
I got to. I'm not going to out you to Bills Nation, but I think as soon as you put your stamp of approval on the Buffalo Bills, that was the end for them.
You know, I'm almost inclined to go along with it, but they've come up short so often, and I feel so bad for the Bills fans because they're so genuinely nice. And Broncos did that back in the '80s, so I remember that, and so it's like I think we're brothers and sisters in pain. I think that's why we get along. Good for you. Yeah. Yeah, excellent. You and me too, both. We're brothers in pain as well.
Yeah, that's a different kind of pain. It's because we talk to each other on a regular basis. That's what causes
Jeff, this is
pain,
episode 54.
Woo!
If you can believe that.
I can't.
So show notes will be available at basicafshow.com/54.
And Tom, we have a guest this week. Yeah, plural. This is another plural. So the last show, we had a couple guests on. We've multiplied by 2. Tom, do us a favor. Before we introduce who we have with us, play us a clip.
I'd be happy to.
All right, but we're running out of time. This thing's going to come swooping back. So what are we going to do about Zell?
I will. Well, I'm not going to help him out, but I will attack. Actually, I probably will jump down to rescue him.
Okay,
thanks,
great.
bud.
So we'd like to welcome to the podcast for this once every other week thing, the cast and crew and DM of the Dungeons in the Attic podcast. Welcome aboard.
Thank you for having us.
Hello.
Hi.
Woo! All right. So Dungeons in the Attic, I'm going to let them tell on themselves in a minute, but Dungeons in the Attic is a D&D podcast. Actually, technically, it's a role-playing game, an RPG podcast that's, at the time of this recording, has just released their 7th episode. It's quite good storytelling, and I'm going to hand it off to the Dungeon Master, and you can go around, everybody can introduce themselves, and then we'll get to talking about this, because it's a really fun podcast, and we're really psyched to have you guys on.
Thank you so much for having us. Hi, guys. I'm Michael. I am the Dungeon Master of the DITA podcast, and I'm joined by my fabulous players.
Peter, who is playing Cassian.
I'm Kristen, and I play as Maeve.
I'm Sebastian. I'm playing Pleiades.
And my name is Steve, playing Zell.
Yeah, and this is the 5 of us, and we have actually a new member joining soon, but you'll have to listen to the podcast to figure out who that is going to be. But awesome. It's the 5 of us right now, and we've been operating out of Peter's attic, which is where we got the name for Dungeons in the Attic. And we just released our 7th episode, which is a huge relief for us. We read somewhere that most podcasts don't get to episode 7. So releasing episode 7 was a big feeling. So we're very happy about that.
That's awesome. Congratulations. That's
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really, really big thing. So I know some of you. That's how we got you on this podcast. And you've been working on this for quite a bit of time. So why don't you first give us a little bit of backstory as to what world we're in and kind of what the backstory is for this particular crusade that you're currently on.
Sure. Yeah. So we're playing in the world of Aldebaran. I imagined this world there's a real star called Aldebaran in the Milky Way.
It's not Star Wars.
It's not far from here. And who's to say if it has any exoplanets that actually can support life? But we imagined this world that is ancient and old, and we imagined this world where Aldebaran, the star, is slowly dying. It's at the end of its life cycle. It's a huge red sun. Essentially, it's a very dying Earth, sort of setup. If you've ever read the Dying Earth series, those sort of stories of this world that's been through countless civilizations, and the histories are just piled on top of each other, civilizations on top of each other, and the world is very strange and very exotic, and it's near its end, essentially. Although who's to say whether or not the characters know that or not? But they live in this sort of, post-apocalyptic dying world. And right now, the setting we're mainly going to be in is Gaja Den. Gaja Den is the imperial city, or what once was the imperial city, which is now sort of decaying after this great empire has fallen. And these 4 characters are familiar with, live in, or know about the great city of Gaja Den, and they either hail from it or are basically the whole plot and all the drama is going to be centered around Gaja Den and the person who rules Gaja Den, the Witch Queen. And that is going to be our main villain for this season of Dungeons in the Attic.
All right, cool. And so you've got 4 players in this who are basically exploring or discovering the world. Kristen, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell us, again, your character's name, which I believe is Maeve, but tell us who your character is and what your character's secrets are.
Oh, all of them? I can't tell all of them.
Not all of them,
The
right?
podcast.
You have to listen to the podcast, but give us a little backstory on your character, Maeve.
Sure. So the essentials of my character is that her name is Maeve. She's probably about 19 years old, and she's a young bard hailing from the city of Gaja Den. So in Hyperborea, Dungeons & Dragons, the bard class is a subclass of the thief class. So my history of Maeve is that she grew up on the streets as a thief, and eventually, for reasons or methods that maybe I won't go into too much detail because it's part of my character development, she learned to pick up instruments. She learned the history of the city of Gaja Den and carries with her a vast array of lore, of information. So she's constantly checking out her environment, racking her memory to see what she knows, if anything around her can offer her any clues. She loves to talk to people and learn more about what's happening in the city or around the city. She's a social character with sort of defensive qualities, I would say, whose story I am really eager to explore because we've really only just finished the first chapter of all of this. But that's generally what Maeve is doing. She's a young bard thief, and she kind of got lumped in with the rest of these guys in their first adventure, never having met any of them before.
Okay, and that is one of the conceits at the start of this, correct? None of you know each other, is that?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
They're all prisoners heading to the same prison, Mirak Mines, high in the Mirak mountain range.
All right, cool. Peter, tell us about your character.
My character's name's Cassian. He is of a different race than everyone else. He's like an Ufa folk, we call him.
Okay, explain.
They're
Sounds like you almost said a heffalump, which
so they're kind of like an ancient people of this, like Aldebaran, I guess. And yeah, they're in a way they're like the elves, I guess, of this world. I would consider them in a way. So they have kind of like this historical background in this world compared to like what are the people, the actual humans?
Moshem,
yeah. They're like far older than them. So he comes from like the background of, he's a runegraver, which is like a cleric subclass, and he uses like a deity to cast his spells, and does like weird things where like he cuts his hand open and reads like a rune poem, and has to have like some sort of medium, like a stone or a bone or like a twig or something, and he inscribes runes on them and then like says the poem to cast a spell. And he's very I guess like reserved is kind of the word.
Okay.
Yeah, he comes from a background of being lonesome, given he's, kind of like this outsider of the city, because they don't live in the city. These people, they live like kind of out in the woods or the desert areas. And yeah, he kind of got lumped into this with everybody too, just visiting the city and being sent away to the mines. Yeah, I mean, I haven't revealed very much about him yet, so I don't want to really give too much.
No. Yeah, and we don't expect you to do that, but just kind of to give us an idea of who you are and what's going on. All right, cool. Sebastian.
Yeah, I'm Sebastian. I play Pleiades. Pleiades is a very interesting character because he's the one character that isn't actually a prisoner. He kind of just found him in a coffin in the middle of the desert.
Great.
They open the coffin and they find this guy with just a completely messed up burnt face who can shoot fire missiles and blind people. He's kind of very much a fish out of water type character. He's very optimistic because he's kind of like a newborn baby. He's just excited about the world and what's in it, to the point where it's like a very blinding optimism, almost to the detriment of others at one point.
Okay. And Steve.
Hello. Yeah, so I play a character named Zell. Zell is a legerdemainus, which is also a subclass of thief. So Maeve and I share similarities in that way. But what a legerdemainus is specifically is a thief and a magician blend, and they get to choose a class of magic. And the one that I chose for Zell is illusionist. He likes to blend in, stay unseen. He also is from Gajaden. And he doesn't know Maeve, or at least know her directly. The city's huge and vast, and there's a lot of people, so more than likely they don't know each other, but they're probably in the same bars and taverns and stuff like that, so maybe he's heard her music. Zell is 21. He is, very mysterious in a lot of ways. He keeps to himself. He doesn't necessarily offer a lot up. I think also there's an element of searching within himself to figure out who he is, because certain things in the story that have yet to be revealed, are left leaving him wondering why he is where he is and what his purpose is in life and stuff like that. So that's pretty much it. He's also very daring too. He has no problem kind of rushing forward and doing whatever it takes.
Very cool. All right. So I have listened to this podcast. I'm halfway through the 6th episode. And
thank you, by the way.
You're welcome.
Yeah, man.
Sure. It's what's been really intriguing to me is how so we're listening to you discover this world, and we're listening to you discover this world as both characters, the characters that you've just given us, including the DM. DM is also, while is certainly running the game and making has essentially created this world that we're living in. But what I find really interesting is the back and forth that all of you are playing with each other. So there are moments when it's Kristen and Peter and Sebastian and Steve and Michael in the room. And there are other moments where it's the characters. I find this really entertaining. The storytelling in this is delightful, and it really is. It feels, in some ways, like some combination between watching someone play a video game, being able to kind of see what's going on and kind of having that back and forth that's going on there, and sitting back and having a story told to me, which I really love about it. It's an interesting world. You guys get yourself into interesting trouble throughout. Some of this, without giving too much away, comes to very errant dice rolls that have not played too well in the favor of the characters. But Michael, what first of all, what led you to want to, one, create this world, two, start this podcast?
Great question. I spent so much of my creative life since as young as, being in middle school, trying to write things and trying to write my own stories. And I always hit this sort of block where I knew where the story was going and I sort of became bored, right? Like I would write out the whole plot in my mind, and then I would get bored of the story that I had already written. So I couldn't bring myself to actually go and write it. And maybe that's a flaw of mine, but I kept hitting these blocks where I was like, oh, I already know how it ends. So I don't know, I'll just move on to the next story, right? I didn't want to spend the time to write it out for someone else to read. I was already bored. That's a problem, right, for a creative. And then I discovered Dungeons and Dragons in college. Some friends of mine had a spot open for a game. They asked me if I'd like to fill in. I played, and my mind was blown. I couldn't believe that there was this medium of storytelling that allowed for the story to be generated on the spot in a way that wasn't just dictated, right? We're not just saying, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, which can feel very contrived and sort of, if good things happen or bad things happen, it doesn't really feel like, they needed to happen that way. It feels like you could have just decided something else, or what are the stakes, right? But there was this game that could generate story in the moment, and there were rules that enforced those happenings, right? So even if I wanted my character to save the day, they might not. And the intensity of that, could this happen? Could it not? What's going to occur every single moment? That was addictive to me. I was like, how do I do more of this? How do I get this in my life? And ever since college, D&D has become this intense passion for me, bringing people around a table to enjoy the energy of each other, to enjoy telling a story together that nobody knows how it's going to go, including me, the DM. And that's my favorite thing about it, is that I have an arc, if you will, for the whole, let's say the next 100 episodes, right? I have a general idea of where things should go. But every single episode, every single die roll is carving out the river of this story. Each of these players is designing the story without them even realizing they're doing it. And I think this first chapter is a great example of that. If you listen to the chapter in the second episode, something occurs that basically not derails, but takes the chapter in a whole different direction than where I thought I wanted to take it. And it's that magic of those random die rolls, generating story on the spot, and the inspiration that comes from that. That's what I love about this kind of work. So that's where I gained that love.
So let me ask you a question. And Tom, interject at any point in time if you want to. But yeah. It's like a mic check. So you've created a world. There is talk in the podcast about a map that you've created, a bit map of your world. But what you're telling me is, while you've kind of plotted out some things, the dice rolls surprise you as much as they surprise everybody in the room. So, how much story are you generating, like in an improv fashion? I mean, something happens, somebody makes a decision, and that's the interesting thing about this. Tom and I will both tell you, well, I can't speak for Tom, but I can speak for myself, that, Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games, when we were kids, it was all part of the satanic panic. It was...
I mean, it's still very much that. Don't get us wrong.
Yeah. Well, but what's interesting, all the bad press that these role-playing games got, if anybody who's actually played a role-playing game knows that was BS.
And it was right up there with the playing the rock records backwards.
Yeah.
To get the messages
Backmasking,
there,
man.
subliminal
Right.
messages and everything. Yeah.
You need.
You got dragged to court for that. Remember that? That's
Yeah, a
Suicide
couple of them.
Solution song.
Got sued for that, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
back
funny.
in the day.
But
The Beatles, I think, had one of those on the.
oh yeah,
I believe
absolutely
they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
In Little Nicky, they have one in Chicago has one.
Wait, Chicago the band?
Yeah, it's in the movie Little Nicky, the Adam Sandler movie. He plays it backwards, and it goes, "I command you in the name of Lucifer to spread the blood of the innocent." And they're just like, Chicago kicks ass, and they're just like,
That's
my favorite scene.
That's very funny. Anyway, my point being, this is very much storytelling, and I think what surprises me most is how surprised not only are the characters when they discover something or they have a dicey dice roll, but Michael, you have a couple of oh no moments in these.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
And
every single time I put a combat encounter. So everything that happens is usually called an encounter, right? You're either meeting a new character that you're going to talk to, or you're meeting some giant spider that you're going to have to fight. They're all called encounters. And every time I create what I call a combat encounter, it doesn't have to end up with combat, right? They can figure it out and figure a way around it. But every time I put something in front of them that wants to kill them, I panic. Every single time, because I'm not a computer. I can't determine what the percentages are of them surviving these encounters. I don't have the time that a game developer has to balance everything to make sure that players feel like they've had a fair challenge. So I put these things in front of them with just a basic, just my experience having run these games for this many years of what I think is going to be a fair combat encounter. And I just have to hope the dice fall in ways that feel not out of control. And then suddenly we've got 3 dead characters and they're on the run. Like I'm telling you, every single time they fight something, my heart is thumping. It really is. And then they roll a 1 and I'm like, oh my God. Oh no. It really is anxiety inducing.
Yeah, Mike actually has a dab pad. You can see him sweating, and he's please survive.
So, Tom, you were going to say something?
Yeah, real quick. So for people that may not be familiar with the concept and everything and how the game operates, so as Dungeon Master, what is your primary role?
My responsibility at all times is to entertain. And the way you do that, which is, I think, this is the most concise way to do that, to entertain, is you create challenges. And you don't create challenges that have one solution. You create challenges that are open-ended, right? I made a mistake in the second episode of creating a puzzle that had one solution. And that I knew that rule already going into it, but I second-guessed myself. Because I was like, oh, I'm doing something new. I'm making a story. Maybe I should do like a traditional puzzle. That was a mistake, because any sort of challenge in D&D that has only one solution is not going to be an entertaining challenge. Entertaining challenges in D&D allow the players to work together to talk about and create their solution. So a great example is just a gorge, right? Something to cross over, right? And you don't say that the solution is they have to knock over a tree and let it land and so they can cross it. You let them decide how they're going to do it. Maybe they've got a teleportation spell. Maybe they've got somebody who can jump really far. Maybe they want to throw a rope, but you just let them enjoy the challenge. And then you give them another challenge after that. And all you got to do, it's very basic. I've learned that it's a very simple formula. You just create challenges one after the other that allow them to think creatively and that are varied. So you do a physical puzzle here. They got to get across this gorge. Then you have an encounter with a troll and you got to fight that. So we've had a physical puzzle and a combat puzzle. And then you hit them with a role play puzzle. So now they got to talk to this king and convince him to let them be on his land, right? So you give them each a little bit of a different part of a story. Combat, a physical challenge, chatting with a character, and you just give them these challenges that they can overcome in whatever way they see fit, and they're going to be entertained the whole way through. And that's my formula.
Okay.
But that's your responsibility as a dungeon master,
Awesome.
essentially. That's my take on it. I can't claim that to be the official way that Dungeons and Dragons TM,
It's the only way to do it.
operates. But that's how I do it, and it's a very stressful experience. And you're trying to make sure that the people in the room are having a great time, and you've got to find the most efficient way to do that every single week. And I think I found something that works for me. So
Cool. Let's Tom play a clip. Maybe the spider clip. Is it a good
All right.
choice?
All right, here we go.
Never
okay,
mind.
so instead of you firing this arrow, what happens is you lift your bow and you pull back.
And you hit Zell.
And just as you pull back, the black mass that's blocking the tunnel unfurls. And you see these glinting eyes, it looks like dozens of eyes, some of them big, some of them small, spread out all around its head. And the giant spider unfurls its long.
Fire missile. I'm not gonna shoot fire missile. I don't want this to happen.
Its long, spindly legs and its fangs, hairy fangs, come out dripping venom.
Oh, damn it.
And it starts moving forward towards you, blocking the whole tunnel.
I'm gonna shoot at one of its eyes with my flame missile.
That would be fun if you could get the first initiative. So let's roll initiative,
Oh
guys.
yes, that's right.
That still makes my skin crawl.
Sebastian does this every combat encounter we have. I'm in the middle of a description, and he's like, I'm going to stab it now.
Or anytime there's any description of something, I'm going to grab that. I'm going to go look at that.
Which he's not wrong to do. He's basically trying to skip the cutscene and just do
Yeah.
Skip the cutscene, yeah.
The dialogue. I'm like, all right, yep, and mission's over.
I think I'm going to borrow that at work. Next time someone pisses me off, I'm just going to scream out, fire missile.
That's good. Yeah.
We got to make that into a shirt one day. That image of you pointing with the smile and it says fire missile. Yeah, I like it.
So this clip, it's from episode what? Which episode was that in?
That is episode 7.
Okay, so that's the one I haven't even listened to. No wonder I didn't recognize it.
Yes. Yeah. If you're on 6, you got,
I got a little ways to go to catch up to that one. But one of the things I want to point out, you're doing. There's a lot going on here. You've got some sound design going on. You've got, and I know you give credit to, I guess, where you're getting these clips from.
Sirenscape. It's a website that provides royalty-free music as long as you sign up for their monthly charts. They're great. We really love using them.
Awesome. Yeah. But what's interesting is, that whole scene, even though, I mean, what was that, Tom? It was probably under a minute worth of, worth of audio. It was pretty intense. So to the players, what are you guys feeling in these moments as you're playing this game with, as you're discovering the spider along with us?
I think I'm pretty accurate to my character where I'm kind of very excited to kill this thing. But immediately it's like, oh, giant monster. I'm like, I can't wait to just strangle this thing with my bare hands.
For me, it's remarkable because you're, as the player, you're watching it unfold and watching the story come to life before you. But as the character, it's a reality. So I'm looking at my character sheet, looking at the spells that I have, trying to assess the room, the other people around me, what kind of state of health is everybody in. You're trying to be ready to take action, whether that's to fight or to flee. There are two kinds of things happening, where you're enjoying the story, but you're also participating. So it's really incredible.
So you made mention of something, Kristen, called a character sheet. And again, for those that aren't kind of in the club, who have not maybe ever played a role-playing game, can you just explain what it is that you're talking about when you say character sheet?
Sure. So a character sheet is essentially a small piece of paper that has a lot of information on it that dictates how your character will play or can affect different situations. So the six main stats in Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe specifically our campaign, are strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And so based on these stats, you can use whatever you have a higher score in to play effectively in a particular scenario. So we have your character stats, and then I also have how much health I have. What die do I roll when I'm using my weapon? What kind of weapons do I have? What kind of things am I carrying in my knapsack? All of this information is on my quick reference character sheet that I look at just to double check how I'm going to play for a particular character. And if you're in different types of campaigns playing different characters, you'd have a different character sheet breakdown that you could easily reference for many different situations. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. And when you say, so you have for each of those traits that you have different levels. Is that something you decide, or is that something that you in the process of beginning this game that you're rolling dice to kind of figure out what you actually get strength-wise or health-wise, or how is that decided?
Yeah, Mike or anybody at the table, you can correct
Steve?
me if maybe Steve can speak to this. Steve is really our technical guy. He's big into rules, big into the technicality of everything. And he'll often point at our character sheets and say, oh, actually, you roll a d6 on this.
Yeah.
So yeah, Steve.
All right, Steve, hit it. Tell us.
I'm the bad guy. I'm like, oh, you didn't follow that rule. I try to. I like to play as authentic as possible. So, what's on the player sheet matters. And the way that's determined is when you're creating your character, the character sheet that Kristen just talked about, outside of your name and a lot of the creative things which you just come up with on your own, your strength, your dex, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, those are all rolled. And each game you roll a different set of dice. In this case, you roll to determine like your strength, for example. You would roll 4d6 and you take the three.
Okay, explain. Just because, again,
so
for the non-nerdy birds out there.
Non-nerd, yeah. So a d6 is a six-sided dice, and you're rolling these 4 dice to determine what that number is going to be within strength. And in this particular game, the system we're using, it says if you're going to roll for strength, dex, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, you have to roll 4d6. After you roll those 4d6, you take the 3 highest and you add them together. So let's say you got a 6, a 3, a 2, and a 3. You take the 2 away, you add 6, 3, and 3 together, and you get that number, and that's your strength. And then you go on and you do the same thing for every other particular attribute.
Okay. And when you face a challenge and something happens to you, do you lose? If you have a strength of 6, can it go down to 5, 4, 3, or
it doesn't typically, but
Okay.
it can, depending on what sort of monster you're facing. So there are certain monsters in the world of D&D that can drain certain stats.
okay?
Yeah, so like vampires, for example, they're one monster that can sap a certain attribute. But generally speaking, your attributes stay the way they are. And with each attribute is attached either a certain plus or minus, which then goes into. So on the player sheet, there's something called like a stat block, and each stat block has a certain minuses and pluses depending on what you had rolled in each of these attributes. So then when you roll your D20, which is generally what you're doing to determine most things outside of, I don't want to get too complicated, outside of D6, which is usually used for tests of strength or dex or things like that. These numbers give you bonuses. So let's say you're doing something that's strength related and you have a 16th strength out of 18. Usually it's, 18 and is the highest, and I believe 9 is the lowest, right, Mike?
No, it can go
Or
all the way
3.
down to 0.
0, yeah.
But an average score is around 9, 10, 11, or 12. And
Right.
then if you've got somewhere around 16, that's pretty high strength.
Yeah, so you would roll, and you'd roll a d20, which is a 20-sided dice, and let's say you got a 15. And let's say your strength is a 16. That might give you, just making this up off the top of my head, it'll give you a +2. So now you roll that 15, and then you would add the +2. So you actually rolled a 17. And that will help you, hopefully, pass a certain thing you're trying to do, whether it's to hit a monster or to jump a small gap or climb a building, whatever it is. But essentially on the sheet, you have these attributes, and they're rolled, and whatever they are, you get plus or minus that you then put in each stat block according to what attribute you're talking about. And there's a lot of complexities to this particular game because it's an older system. So there's a lot more little nuanced things that I don't want to, get into because it gets a little bit more complicated. But you also have saving throws and movement speed and things like that. Obviously movement, like an average would be, let's say 30 feet. And if you're playing on a map and each square is 5, you can move up to as many squares 30 feet takes up. Saving throws generally are something that, again, depending on all these stats that are rolled out, which are fundamentally the building blocks to your character, will hopefully add to everything else. So like your saving throw, if you rolled very high on something, that will give you a higher saving throw. If you're in a precarious situation, Mike would say, all right, roll a saving throw for disease or saving throw for death or something like that. And then you would have to, like, for example, Peter's character Cassian, he has a saving throw of a 16. So if he has to roll and make it, sorry, I don't mean to give that away. If he has to roll to save, he has to roll his D20, and he has to get above a 16.
16 or above.
Yeah, 16 or above. And you hope you don't have any minuses that where, let's say he rolled a 16 and then he had a -1 somewhere on his stat block that would now take that away and become a 15. Now he fails his save and there's a penalty to that and all.
Got
So
it.
that's basically it.
All right. Very cool.
It's a good lead in, I think, to our philosophy as a group is that there are technically a lot of rules in D&D, but we don't want them to take center stage. We want the rules to be guide rails that help us keep the game moving forward, an engine. But there are a lot of rules that we ignore. Like, for example, movement speed. We don't use that. We're using theater of the mind. So we're not playing with 5-inch squares. We're playing in this created space in our heads. So we ignore movement speed. There's also rules for encumbrance, like how much you're carrying, and if that slows you down, we ignore that unless it becomes something that is dramatically interesting, right? Like this, they're carrying, like Zell is unconscious and they're trying to carry him across the desert. Then that's dramatically interesting. But there's a lot of things that we forego from the system's rules in order to facilitate story first. And even the creators of D&D, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, would tell you a lot of these rules you don't need. They're there if you want to get into the nitty-gritty, but there's very basic concepts you can use to facilitate any story. So as intimidating as all that sounds, it's important for people that have not played D&D to know that you need to know very little to have a lot of fun with this system.
Awesome. Yeah, I will say, in my experience listening to this podcast, it's obvious that story is central, not the rules of the game, so to speak, which I find really enjoyable. Like I said, it's very narrative in terms of what's going on story wise, and again, it's clear.
Thank you so much.
Clear that you guys are you're really enjoying what you're doing. Just as a reminder, I'm Terry Gross here. We're talking with the cast of the Dungeons in the Attic podcast, and this is the Basic AF show. Now we're going to go to NPR affiliates for the news. So, Tom, why don't you play the next clip, please?
All right, here we go.
Finally, your vision becomes clear. These are not trees at all. They are 3 charred corpses affixed to wooden stakes. And what's more, there's something wrong with them. They're human and not quite human. The man finishes cutting down one of the corpses, and it falls to the ground with a sickening crunch. He turns to you, and you can see that look in his eyes. He's been you. He knows exactly what you're going through. This is what they will do to you if they ever find you. This is why you have no family. To them, you are dead. We are family now. You and I, Cassian. You awaken and remember where you are.
And so with that clip, we now have to add a trigger warning to the beginning of the a corpse trigger warning to the beginning of the podcast episode.
We are an explicit podcast, unfortunately.
Say that again?
Oh, we do tag the explicit tag for our podcast, just in case. Because we do have some violence and some gory descriptions sometimes.
That was really great. That was a really great segment. So, unlike your characters in this podcast in Dungeons in the Attic, the people that are getting together, each of you knew each other well beforehand. You know, you didn't just show up and start doing this podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how the five of you got together and what precipitated the idea of actually creating a podcast around an RPG?
Absolutely. So, my wife and I, Kristen and I, we moved to Beacon.
What? You guys are married?
Surprise!
Wait, really? I didn't even know that.
During
Jeff, you didn't know this?
No, I didn't.
We're all finding out for the first time.
Okay, great.
Congratulations.
It's nice to meet you. During COVID, Kristen and I moved to Beacon, and I was in the throes of my, I'm at home a lot. I just want to play. I've been wanting to get a group together to play RPGs for so long. And at that time, Kristen was playing a little bit here and there, but it wasn't necessarily something she was ready to put aside time for. She was working on a lot of creative projects, so I had to find a group. And when I got to Beacon, I ran into Steve at a bar, and we got to talking about D&D, and we sort of just impromptu decided we were going to form a little group. And then we found a couple of other friends of ours that I met basically that year, and we formed a little tiny group in Beacon, and we were playing out of our friend's apartment and having a blast. And eventually those campaigns ended after a year or so, and I was looking to play again. I was sort of, it was a dry season again, and I was looking for another group. So Steve and I, we sort of were like, all right, let's put together another game. Who can we get? And we talked to Peter, who I knew from my job, and Sebastian, who I actually knew through a coworker as well. And they never played before, but we sort of knew each other a little bit, and we said, hey, you want to play D&D with us? And they joined us, and we started playing January of last year. So that's 2024. January of 2024, we all started playing during a big snowstorm, and we played this game called Shadow Dark. It's basically D&D, but a rules light version. And we stayed up until, past midnight during the snowstorm, just having a blast, doing this really introductory little dungeon, and we were all Sebastian had never played any D&D before, and I won't speak for you, Sebastian, but
No, tell us about that, Sebastian, because that's kind of interesting. I would have thought
the way I was introduced to this was kind of weird. It was just very happenstance, where it was a New Year's Eve party that my sister invited me to. Shout out to Louisa. I just had no plans, and she's like, you got to come over, you'll meet people, have fun. And I was like, all right, fine. And then I knew Pete beforehand because Louisa is dating Pete. Whoa. I know. I knew Pete, and then I met Steve and Michael that night, and they're like, oh, you should totally play with us. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, I'll just play a session or two, and then I could just go back to my computer where I like to be. But then, I think maybe first session, I immediately fell in love with immersing myself into a world and acting like a completely different person, because I just always liked acting, and I like being a big strong guy that hurts people.
Are you that in real life?
No, he's a gentle giant.
I would like to seem like I am, but I'm really not.
So we started playing. We're having a great time, and we kept meeting up for these just casual impromptu sessions, and we would play for hours at Pete's house. And we decided to move everything up into his attic so that we wouldn't be bothering his girlfriend Louisa while she's trying to watch something or have some friends over. So we're upstairs. Not that she was bothered by it. She loves us and loves the group, but give her some space. And so we went up into the attic, which is sort of a recording studio for Peter. Mm-hmm. He's a really talented musician and singer, and he's been in several bands, and he has a lot of experience and a lot of equipment. And that wasn't on our minds when we started hanging out in the attic and rolling some dice. But we played this whole campaign together. I think we did like 6-7 months of play together, meeting up, I think, every week.
And long hours, too. We'd play at
5-6 hours.
5 o'clock and go to 11. And the beauty of it, too, is, when Mike was telling me about it, so Shadow Dark was a Kickstarter that me and Mike both threw money at, and when he got it, he was really excited to play, and he asked me, and I was like, yeah. And he was like, yeah, I just want to, do like 2 or 3 sessions. That's it. I just want to just try this little thing.
Right.
It wasn't even supposed to be what it is today, which, is amazing, because this family that we've become is amazing. But I just remember he's like, yeah, just let's maybe 2-3 sessions. Just want to see how the mechanics go and see what the story's like. And yeah. So
and then
Mike,
fast forward, we ended up doing 6 months of this story, and we went through all this. We got to max level, and they were super powerful. They went from zeros to heroes, super powerful characters, defeated the villains and saved the world. And it was just awesome. We had a great time. But at the end of that, at the tail end of that, we started getting this idea, like, wouldn't it be fun to record these episodes for us to listen to, just for us? And we broke out the mics and started recording. And then that turned into us being like, well, Sebastian was like, oh, what if I did sound effects? And Peter was like, oh, what if I made some music for it? And Steve was like, oh, what if I got our characters drawn up? And suddenly we were just, without even meaning to, starting to move in this creative direction where we were turning it into a show, but we didn't know it. And then we kind of looked at each other one day. And we're like, why don't we make a podcast? Like, let's just do it. And other people are doing it. Critical Role is the big one. And there's also the Glass Cannon podcast that we listen to. And we love those guys. And they're big. And why can't we do it? So we bought the mics, and you can see it in our promotional photos. Peter soundproofed the whole attic as much as he could anyway. And we bought a table and got to work. And that's where it came from. But I think it really generated from watching all of us contribute, all of us suddenly saying, I'll do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. And I'd never seen that before. And Steve had been poking me for like 3 years to start a podcast. And I kept saying, no, that's a lot of work. No, let's just have a fun time. Let's be casual. And then when I saw everybody contributing and getting excited, I had to say yes. And then we sort of fell into it in a beautiful way.
Yeah. And then after we formed it, Mike had basically came to us and said, I think I want to bring on another person to this to, open it up a little bit. And he kind
of sort of 4 guys just saying like, "Oh, that'd be cool."
Yeah,
oh, yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, would this be tight? Yeah.
And then he I had played with Kristen many times and other sessions that
she would jump into.
Yeah, that Mike would be running with a bunch of other people and stuff like that. And so he said to all of us, I really want to bring Kristen in. I think she would be dynamic for the podcast, all of her theater skills and her voice and all that stuff. And we were like, yeah, duh. Like, of course, bring her in.
Yeah.
And,
that was our
she's
missing
here and it's
member.
amazing. Yeah.
I mean, in our previous campaign, we did have a female character that was just basically controlled by everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Power to the patriarchy. That's good.
No. I played the character.
Yeah. I played.
Well,
Yeah,
no, you played her, but I was the voice.
Yeah.
Of her.
Mike was the voice. I rolled.
played her, and
So there was
Steve
always-
rolled for her.
Yeah.
And she was often disappointed in their decisions.
Yeah.
So there was always like that empty space that we kind of were like missing somebody there. And she perfectly filled that role for us.
You were looking for the female perspective to say, no, boys, we are not doing that. That's mean and bad and rude.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love playing with these guys. I'm flattered that they asked me to join them. And I do feel like I'm able to give them like a bit of a feminine perspective and kind of open the story up a little bit in the way that I can. I've really been enjoying it so far.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that. I really love the fact that it's not 4 dudes sitting in a closet playing a game. I did.
Well, because you would listen back to those recordings and be like, there's something missing here. Because we're all agreeing with each other, basically, and there's just like a little energy that we knew had to be corrected. And getting Kristen on was perfect. She is the final missing piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, I definitely love that. It's a nice. It adds. I will say it adds a lot to your storytelling.
I totally agree. She adds so much
For sure.
Alrighty. So, Tommy, you got anything?
I do, actually.
Okay.
If you don't mind. Okay.
No,
Because I know we're getting close on time, but
yeah, we are. So hit it.
So with the episodes, and you mentioned early on when we started, Michael, that you had maybe 100 in mind. How much time would you say per episode goes into kind of the creative prep work, maybe laying the framework for the story and the arc of what you might have in that particular episode? And then I don't know if you guys do like pre-meetings beforehand to kind of game plan, here's kind of what we're going for. But as you mentioned there a bit ago, a lot of it though is dynamic and it can change based on roles and things that come up. So I'm just curious, like how much of kind of prep work goes into that?
That's a great question. And this is something that a lot of DMs struggle with. Dungeon Masters, that's what that stands for, is how much prep work to put in to the game, right? There's a general rule of thumb out there that says in an hour of gameplay, the characters can get up to about 3 things. 3, not overly intense, but 3 generally explorable things, right? They can maybe explore one chamber, right? Then do one puzzle and then have one combat encounter in about an hour. It's a really rough estimate, right? So we structure our podcast to be an hour and about 15 or an hour 30 at the most for digestibility for our listeners, mostly, but also for me, because it is a lot of prep behind the scenes. So what I do is I essentially, after an episode ends, I'll start thinking about where I want to take things next and what sort of challenges will be novel that I have in mind. And then I will sit down, usually the day before, and do 2 hours of prep. And I will sketch out basic ideas. And then the day of, I make sure I have off those days. And the day of, I'll spend in the morning, I usually go to a cafe, and I'll spend another 2 hours refining. So it's essentially a 4-hour process for me. 2 of those being generative and 2 of those being polishing. And then you mentioned how things can sort of go off the rails and random dice rolls can take things in odd directions. And that is another skill that a DM has to have, is you have to be able to roll with the punches, especially because players are known. This is sort of like the big joke of players in D&D. They're known for ignoring what you have prepared and deciding to do something entirely different that catches their eye. And you have to be ready for that at all times. And what that means is, instead of prepping storylines and plots that can easily be derailed, you prep tools, you prep situations, right? You prep challenges. And those things, these sort of ideas of challenges and tools can be inserted anywhere you need them, right? So if I want to create a magic item that can fuse 2 things together, you put one in one end and one in the other, and it fuses together 2 things, that's a tool, right? And that tool doesn't necessarily need to be something that happens right away or happens when I say it, when it should narratively. It's in the world, and I've prepped it, and it's ready to go. And a challenge can be brought anywhere and inserted anywhere. So you're gonna be more efficient with your prep time if instead of prepping this rigid railroad storyline, you're prepping tools and scenarios that you can then freeform throw out when you need to. Now, I just want to preface that by saying that not every DM runs their game that way, and there are multiple ways to have fun. That's how I have fun. That's all.
Yeah, and I also think too, because Tom had asked this, is there any like pre-meeting on like what direction we want to go?
Oh, right.
Everything is spontaneous. We are literally creating it on the fly. There's no, I mean, the only pre-meeting we have is Krista leads us through a warm-up to get our voices ready, our minds awake, and bodies feeling loose. But
yeah, we have no idea what
we
we're
have
going to
no
get to.
idea what we're doing, how it's going to happen. We know the story, we know what's going on within that moment, but we never sit down beforehand and say, okay, so Zell's going to do this and Maeve's going to do that, because we're carving the story out with our imaginations, with the help of the dice roll, with Mike leading us through everything that we make, whether it's a reward or a consequence. So it's a surprise for everyone, and it keeps you on your toes, because you have to be ready for every moment, especially the role playing stuff. You can get into it into the weeds with role playing, which creates a lot of relationship building and furthering and deepening of a story or stories. Combat. I mean, we don't know. One bad roll and all of a sudden combat takes half an hour longer than we ever anticipated. And one good roll, and all of a sudden Mike's like, oh, I didn't really prep anything after this. But you never know that, because he has all these tools on his belt or behind the screen that he uses, and all of a sudden it's like, just keep threading that magic.
Yeah, and I think ultimately a DM needs experience to understand what it feels like when the characters have completely ignored what he's prepared, and he has to just make it up. Oh, sorry, we got some dogs.
Dogs are loose.
Hey, there's a dog in every
regular
episode
occurrence on this show. So.
But
or the episode's a dog all by itself. That's
it's very
happens.
similar to being a stand-up comedian, in the way that sometimes you're going to bomb, and that's going to be an experience for you. I've played games and run games where what I've come up with doesn't land, and it's not as much fun as I was hoping it would be. And it's just one of those things where you got to keep doing it and keep bringing things to the table and keep trying, and try to be as freeform as you can, because you will eventually get a sense for what your strengths are, and you will play into them, and you'll know what your weaknesses are, and you'll prep those so you have them, right? Like a list of names. I'm bad with coming up with names on the fly, so I have a list of names ready to go.
Fred.
Right. Yeah, and I think that spur of the moment element, brings some of the genuine reactions to the episodes, where you're not really sure what's coming up next. Like in the clip we listened to there with the fire missiles, and I think it seems authentic, not scripted. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, that happened, and you're like, oh God, not this again. But you didn't know that was coming.
Exactly what he says.
And then what's even more fun about that is that I said, if you roll a good initiative, I'll let you do that. And guess what he did? He rolled top initiative, so he got to do it right off the bat.
Which Sebastian does almost all the time.
Yeah.
It's amazing. He's
I don't know how.
I'm a shoot first, ask question later kind of guy.
But I also, I compare D&D to like a choose your own adventure book. And I feel when we're playing, people are listening to us tell them a story. And when it comes to that part where they have to choose which way they're going to go, and they're either going to go to page 38 or 105 and see what happens, we're picking for them. So, that's the part I like about it, is we don't know, and we only do after we make that decision with a dice roll. It's exhilarating, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we really appreciate having all of you on. Michael, Kristen, Peter, Sebastian, Steve. You have an amazing social media presence. Why don't you tell us where we can find you, including where we can subscribe to Dungeons in the Attic?
Absolutely. So we are at DITA Podcast. That's DITA Podcast on Instagram. We have our Spotify page, Dungeons in the Attic, that we're operating primarily out of Spotify right now, and we're trying to get on other platforms. That should be done very soon. Within the second week of February, we'll be basically everywhere.
I can't wait.
Yes.
So we're going to have to go to Spotify to listen.
I know. A lot of people asking us to make sure we're on Apple, so we're getting there. We promise. Also, Sebastian, what were you going to say?
Well, I am the Zoomer of the group because I am the youngest one, so I'm in charge of the TikTok.
That's right.
And soon we'll be rolling out some YouTube videos, which for some reason they let me be in control of. So I'm very excited for everyone to see that soon.
And what's our TikTok?
Our TikTok is DITA Podcast.
Right. It's basically DITA Podcast everywhere.
Yeah. Right. If not, it is literally just Dungeons in the Attic.
Yes. So we got TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and right now on Spotify, and we're on X as well. And
We also have a Patreon.
Patreon, yes, Dungeons in the Attic Patreon, and we'll give you guys all those links as well.
They've already won up this time. They're on Patreon.
Well, I know.
Nobody wants to pay for this.
We haven't asked, so we don't know that's true yet.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, if you'll drop all those links in the show note, we'll make sure that they go into the actual
Yes,
show note for the
you got
episodes.
it.
So people can,
Yeah,
can pull those up.
Awesome. All right. As a reminder, you can always get to us at feedback@basicafshow.com. You can also send us little messages from your favorite podcast app, including voicemails and all that jazz. So feel free. We do like your contact, even when you say that Tom and I look like idiots, because we do. The show music, Psychokinetics, Celsius 7, really grateful, as I've said many times, fits who we are to a T and what's going on here. And our podcast art is Randall Martin Design. So highly encourage you to check out Psychokinetics, check out Celsius 7. Celsius 7 got a ton of stuff. You might get him to let us put out his playlist, publish his playlist somewhere, but he's got a lot of stuff out there that is well worth listening to. And Tommy, I think that's it. What do you got to say? Yeah, I think so.
All right. Michael, Kristen, Peter, Sebastian, Steve, thank you all so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you.
I didn't know
very
what to
much.
expect, and I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
Roll the dice, Tom.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much, guys.
All right. And listeners, thank you guys for hanging out with us as always. As we've said 100 times, not really, it's 54 times. There are a lot of choices for this type of content, and we're honored that you spend some time with us each episode. So we do appreciate that. And until next time, please do have a great rest of your day or your night.
See ya.